right, everybody. Welcome to the IAG Thursday thing. This thing that we do every Thursday, where we hang out. We usually have some cool topics. Sometimes we have some cool people on. We've always got something going on around here. And yeah, it's usually a pretty good time. You hang out, meet some new and interesting people, and maybe accidentally learn something, which is always fun. I'm joined today, as usual, by my co-host and partner in crime, Warranty. How are you today, Warranty?
Hello, sir. If you were stranded in the woods, would you rather be approached by a man or a bear?
I heard this thing this morning. And there's like, the whole thing is like crazy. I mean, most men, their answer to that is, well, what kind of bear?
I'm really mad about this, but first one I saw was somebody going through the statistics of how violent bears are versus how violent men are. And spoiler alert, men are way more violent. So yeah. I was really mad about it.
That's so crazy. Yeah, I heard that on the radio this morning. So today, Warranty, we have a special guest.
Who is that special guest doing?
Well, he hangs out in our chat all the time and answers all of our fun and ridiculous transmission questions. He even posts pictures, dispels myths, all sorts of stuff. So we figured one of these days we were going to actually have him on the show, and we figured we'd do kind of a transmission question roundtable-y thing after we figure out who the hell this guy is, and talk to him about that a little bit. And yeah. So we have Mr. Jonny Trans on.
Hello, everyone.
Hello. Long-time listener, first-time caller. How are you, Johnny?
I'm doing great. Just lurking here and there, coming in at the end of shows, and now I'm on a show.
Yeah, you've been the king lurker, let me tell you.
Oh, for sure. I'm hassling everyone in here, trying to get them to make a separate group for general chat, all kinds of goofy stuff.
So, first of all, thanks for coming on. We appreciate that. Second of all, your name is Jonny Trans. Is that your actual name? What is your actual name?
Oh, this is a good story. So, back when I got into this, I built there was a local Subaru performance shop that got me into Subarus, and they offered me I was building transmissions for a shop at the time. I was building Ford manual transmissions, and I was hanging out at a Subaru performance shop because they were putting cars on the dyno and making, 500, 600, 700 horsepower. And I'm like, holy cow, this is crazy. This is so cool that you can do this on like this little engine. And so they gave me a 6-speed that was just like, people were tripping over it. It was like a 05 6-speed. They're like, here, just take this apart, figure it out, see if you can maybe, if we need you in the future, maybe we can have someone that'll specifically handle some transmission work for us if that's, what ends up happening. Well, I took that to the shop, took it apart, and got to kind of see how a 6-speed is disassembled. That was my very first one. And just shortly after that, the shop, there was some stuff going on, and they needed me to build a transmission for them. And then there was so I had the 05 apart, and then I had this 2012 transmission apart, and I took it apart, and they were like, well, it has a 4th gear grind, so can you swap the synchro out on this and just put it back together and get it so we can sell it or whatever, because it was a 2012 or something transmission, and someone needed it and wanted to buy it, so I fixed it for them. And stupid me, I took it apart and kind of didn't really know a ton. Swapped the 4th gear synchro, and I ended up swapping, as they're the same, I ended up swapping the 5th gear synchro out instead of the 4th gear synchro out. So I found that out later on when the transmission it got sold, went up to Spokane, went into Josh Bader, went into his race car because he blew the transmission up in his car, and that transmission got put in as a backup deal, and it had a problem. And then, so who worked on it last, and who's going to support or fix this transmission? Well, it's me. So I went up to Spokane, which is about 5 hours for me, and Josh was like, well, I mean, I guess you're kind of my transmission builder now. We gotta come out with a name for you. And my name is John Fanning. That's
Okay.
officially that's what my name is. And we just couldn't think of a good name that rung a bell with my last name. Fanning doesn't really go well with any kind of transmission shop name. And then there's kind of that Fast and Furious joke of
I
like
was
we
about
got
to say,
Johnny Tran.
this has
Yeah,
got to
yeah,
be a Fast and Furious reference, and I love
right,
it.
yeah. Yeah,
I'm
so it
here for
literally
it.
is that. It literally is that. So Josh is standing there, and he's like, I mean, we just got to get a good name and like maybe like a logo or something for you to have. We can put it on the car if you're going to sponsor the build on this. And I'm like, yeah. I mean, I'm like all about it because I'm new and green, and
Yeah,
here I am I'm building this transmission that's going in Josh's car, which he was kind of a big like 76 millimeter turbo on a 2.5 liter. It's crazy. And here I am building a dumb transmission for it. And he's like, he came up with the Johnny Trans. How about Johnny Trans? Johnny Trans. And I was like, oh, dang, that's a great name. And ever since then, I've stuck with it. And there's a really funny video Smedia put out where he had some issues with his hatch. And he's like, yeah, we called up Johnny Tran. Well, that's how he's known on the internet, but his real name is actually, we don't really know what his real name is. Johnny, what is your name? Put it in the comments. So I go by Johnny Trans on the internet, and that's what I'm on Facebook, Instagram. Anyone looks me up. I'm just Johnny Trans because that's easy to look up. I don't have a lot of my own personal social media stuff. It's just kind of Johnny Trans. I don't have a lot to post.
How long have you been doing this?
So I worked at the manual transmission rebuild shop 2017 to 2019. When that place closed down, it was a satellite facility from a Texas central location, and it just didn't work out. The finances didn't make sense for what we were doing. I was basically rebuilding Mustang 5-speeds from basically Fox body onward, so T5s, T45s, TR3650s, T56s. I did an MT82 here and there, and a couple other random buddies had like a Evo Trans here and just some random little stuff there. But that experience was very much what kind of taught me, like, I guess, kind of right from wrong, or like it gave me the principles of seeing a mechanical component come apart and then finding a way to like basically troubleshoot. Like you see wear and you're like, okay, there's wear here. Well, we're going to replace this part. And with those transmissions, since they're so old, you get a lot of aftermarket replacement components. So like aftermarket sliders, aftermarket synchros, and you have to do a lot of vetting on your side to verify that, like, when I put this together, this slider is actually going to move when somebody puts load on it and stuff like that. So just fitment and stuff moving and mechanical movement and items and transmissions and alignment. That was very big with that job, and I learned a lot of those principles. And then I never officially was dealer trained on Subaru manual transmissions. I just kind of winged it. And then I did, I had my rough beginning to this. And my recommendation is have a couple of them to rebuild it once so that you can kind of see where the, tight spots are, or the parts are.
I'm a firm believer that the guys who wing it first, and then learn, tend to be the ones that are, they tend to be the innovators within the market. They tend to look at stuff from the outside. The ones who lean on Subaru said this is the way it's supposed to be, tend to be the ones that you don't.
Yeah, those are the guys that put 2 gallons of silicone. Yeah, those are the people that put like, the entire tube of Fuji Bond to glue it together. Like you see it and you can tell. And then the Ford stuff, I saw how stuff was originally assembled. I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel here, and that's another thing. People will go to the extreme, whether it's engines or transmissions, and claim that they can reinvent the wheel and do it better than anybody that's ever done it has done it. And I'm just here like, okay, I don't reinvent the wheel here, but I have my ideas that, like, you do ratio swaps, and there used to be a way that we would do it, and I have kind of a new way of doing it now. So like an 06 transmission, like 04, 05, 06, some of the JDM stuff. Those are the short ratio 1, 2, 3, 4, and then they have the same. They all share the same 5/6 across every USDM STI transmission with some small differences in like keyways. So to convert a short ratio to a long ratio, the long-standing kind of way to do it was swapping out. You could swap out the third and fourth just from an 07, and that gives you a certain result. And then there's the rally spec. Some people I've talked to over there, they have their way of doing it where they swap second, third, and fourth, which is technically the proper way to do it, where you the ratio drops into each gear. Makes sense, and that's not something that I can explain over a phone call or in a car. It's just something that, like, it's the intuitiveness of the transmission in the car, that, like, ability to rev match downshift perfectly to the previous gear. If you have good splits in a transmission, that's what makes that intuitive and feel right when you shift.
Which is why when you put JDM fifth and sixth in your car,
life is good.
If you have a short ratio first or fourth, if you put JDM fifth and sixth in your car, all of a sudden when you're on track, everything just makes sense. Yep. But if you have to use fifth a lot, which you do when you've got a 7,000 RPM red line and you're beating the snot out of it and you actually get fast, that gap between fifth and fourth is super goofy. And then fourth and third is a whole nother thing. And I can't agree with that more.
Yeah, the way the splits work out, you end up the splits, they vary, right? So your 1 to 2 in most STI transmissions is like a 35% RPM drop. So you're shifting at, let's say, 9,000. It drops about 2,700 to 2,800, kind of aerodynamic dependent, and whether or not you're on the limiter or not. It drops a good healthy chunk of RPM, and that's fine first to second, because the car, the engine's not pushing very much torque or using torque to push the car as much in those lower gears, because you have more advantage over the tire with the engine. But obviously anyone that's driven an earlier STI, 06 and earlier, everyone can kind of tell you that 4-5 is pretty rough, and there's a lot of synchro wear with those in the 4 to 5, where the synchronizer wears out faster, and people just kind of don't like that ratio drop. Well, that's kind of one of those in intuition, and like having driven the car, that's what a not good ratio drop feels like. Yeah. And then you drive like a 08 to 17, and you're like, oh, this feels good. This feels kind of right. And even in that situation, there's some stuff that I don't love, where they actually kind of went the other way, where fifth gear is a short drop. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's things you can do.
The same gear.
Yeah, it's 4 and 4.5.
Yeah.
Right. That's exactly right. And then when you do like something like a gear set, if you just drop in a gear set, then you have 2 fifth gears, and you wouldn't know that unless you did all the RPM calculations and you looked at the ratios and you put them in an Excel spreadsheet like I've done. So if you were to calculate out the RPM drops, I'm not trying to overwhelm anyone with information here, but when you in a 04 to 06, you go 35%, 25%, 23%, and then fourth to fifth is a 28% drop, and that's that big jump that really is unpleasant in those cars.
Yeah.
And then as I was saying, the 07 to 18, you have that weird 4-5. That's a 15% drop. So you shifted at 9,800 and you're back down to 8,400-ish. It's like you hear them on the dyno doing a 4-5 shift, and it's like wah, wah. Like it almost shifts into the same gear.
Yep.
Yeah.
So there's on that you can do the Legacy GT or the Legacy Spec B 5th and 6th. So that's like the OEM taller ratio 5-6, and so anyone with a dog box or even the IAG gear set, I recommend that swap, because the factory STI 5th gear is actually technically a shorter ratio than what a PPG dog box 4th gear is. So you technically just have a loud and a quiet 4th and 5th gear,
or
a loud and a quiet 4th gear. So there's that stuff that's I've learned with like the Ford stuff, because there's a lot of Mustang close and long ratio stuff that they do to improve. That's kind of where I got the background in why ratios even matter, or what the hell is a ratio. That's what it is. It's what makes the transmission feel good to drive, and I love that JDM short ratio 5-6. I've built a couple of them at this point, and anybody that I've built them for absolutely love it. Anybody with a 2 liter, I kind of have that discussion of like, if it's a 2-liter and it's never getting run on high octane fuel, the JDM 5.6 is like the shit. And then anyone that's like, it's making 700-800 horsepower, it's got a rotated kit and a big turbo. I'm like, okay, that's where we look at like, the longer ratio stuff. So I don't know. Like FA20,
unless
if you
you're a
6-speed
total
swap,
track slut.
Like
FA20s. Yeah, FA20s, like you put a JDM close ratio transmission in that car and like a good twin disc, like a Exetti twin or even an Exetti triple, they're kind of in the same area. I just like the twin because they have the heavy floater, which doesn't make that noise as much when you push the clutch in. That's like the best driving clutch. Yeah, it's like the best driving clutch I've ever felt. Like from my experience in driving Subarus, the best ever driving car I've ever felt in a Subaru was a FA20 with a Killer B header, and it was the external wastegate variety. It was like 2016 WRX, and it had a JDM, like one of those early 02 JD. It was actually from a limited edition, it's like the S209, but whatever it would have been for like a 02
probably
JDM
the
car.
Spec C Trans's.
S204.
Yeah, the close ratio 5.6 OEM transmission. So it was one of those transmissions. Best driving car I've ever driven to this day. I've never driven something that's more fun in like a back road situation. I think the car made like 350-ish horsepower and amazing driving car. And
Remember
it was
when I
one of
told
those.
you about the raccoon warranty, the car that I drove on the TV show?
Mm-hmm.
What that was a 2.5 on some JDM heads that have been worked. So 2-liter JDM heads that had the combustion chambers opened somehow. But either way, I'm about 80% sure the compression ratio was a little higher on that than it probably should have been.
Mm-hmm.
That car made 360 horsepower and like 430 or something foot-pounds of torque. It's on a JDM short ratio 6-speed, and some sort of twin that we had. And I don't remember how we got this twin, but I swear to God, that car was so much fun to drive.
Oh God, yeah. I drove it one day home from the meet. Oh my gosh. You not only have a whole box full of fourths in your transmission, but the thing just screams. It just goes places. It clears ground.
You hear it like coming towards you, and it's like it sounds like a bike because it's just like blah blah. Like the ratios are so tight.
It was
it's pretty cool.
Instant. Yeah, and I mean, I
felt
run
like Batman.
those same ratios in my trans. Like that's what I run on Boogie.
That's the ultimate Ricer transmission where it's like those GT350 guys that you'll hear them downshift it 11 times and then do a pull in first gear. That's like the same transmission where you downshift it like wham, and then you take off. And it's that's that transmission for sure.
Now Dewey's running higher RPM because he was on a 2-liter, now he's on the 235 D-stroker, but either way, it's higher RPMs than you would get out of a USDM street car. And so the JDM ratios make sense because the engines in Japan would rev higher. So, plus top of 6th gear, I think Dewey in the short ratio was like 160 or 170. So you've got what you need. You just have to rev it to the moon.
It's quite a bit higher than that. I'm hitting almost 160 in 5th now.
Oh, God bless America. That is a lot of speed.
I still have a whole other gear, my guy.
You have another gear at 160?
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh.
So
this is coming from the guy.
That's the reason that I did the math on it. And I was going to end up with something like a 7,500 RPM red line on the 75 to 8 on the 2.5 liter. And with that, I was going to end up running the longer ratios because it didn't make sense with the shorter ratios on Gingerman.
Right.
So I'm like, it's so much easier to build an engine for a trans than it is a trans for an engine when you have a Subaru, because they're, aftermarket gear sets and shit are crazy expensive, and I'm building the motor anyway. So that's why
they don't have those options.
Yeah, so that's why I went with a 2-liter, and it was based on gear ratios and shift points, and that's why I ended up with a 2-liter, and then went on to use, get the 2.3, which is basically a big board 2-liter. And that was the whole reasoning behind that, was why I did that, because the shift points and where I would have to shift at certain points at certain speeds on Gingerman knocked that track being, kind of our Daytona is I figured it out at the time to like knock 4 shifts out, and then it ended up being more than that. It was like 6 after we got to 2, 3, 5 working right.
Wow.
Nice. The thing that people kind of don't, that maybe it's like, even if that's still going over people's heads, it's not that you get the engine. Your engine has an efficiency range of, let's say, like 4,500 ish. With something that's a smaller displacement to let's say like you shifted at 78 or 8,000.
Sure.
It's not that the longer ratios would be a problem in that. Like, it's a relatively narrow power band, but it's like when you're going, I can see it from the circuit perspective. If you're going around a track, there's going to be a lot of different speeds that you enter a corner and leave the corner, and having a closer ratio transmission gives you the ability to it gives you a little bit wider range of RPM options, because sometimes there's just ratios and combinations where you have to downshift and go coming around or coming out of a corner, and it puts you at like 6,500 RPM or 7,000 RPM in second gear. And when you go to leave the corner, you immediately have to shift.
Where when you have all the time in my 05 STI, all the time.
Yeah.
In my 05 STI, and that's because I got a 7,000 RPM red line. Honestly, the thing stopped making power at like 6.
Yeah. Then
so when you build for that, when you're kind of basing your build around your gearing like that, you're really, the concept you're going for is you need to make the fattest possible power band you can, and then pick the trans that's going to match the RPM the best. And with me, I can make a fatter power band by revving the balls off of it. And that's how I ended up where I ended up.
Yep, that's what makes those a little bit better to drive. It just gives you a little bit more, like, the ratios are better, so where like you can vary your speed a little bit more and then still be in a happy spot with where you are in the transmission, and still have room in the gear to accelerate, it's pretty cool when you get it all dialed in, and when it works, and and you hop in a car where it's like dialed in, it's what makes the driving experience fantastic. And that's one of the reasons I love Subarus, because the car itself drives and puts down power so well. And in like a lower horsepower car, more like shorter ratios, it feels more fun to drive because you're doing more as the driver. It's the reason why manual transmission cars are just so much more fun.
They are a really good time.
Going back to ratios real quick. It's learning about ratios back in like 2015, I want to say. It probably came from Dewey. It made me realize how much Subaru compromised to bring the STI to America. So first they had the really short ratio, 1st through 4th, and then a huge gap to 5 and 6, which didn't make sense. And then they upgraded it, so then it's long ratio, 1 through 4, and then 4 and 5 are on top of each other, which also doesn't make sense. That is not how the car and motor is supposed to perform. If you have JDM gears and a JDM motor, it is so much better, which is...
Oh, it's unreal how good that is matched to a 207.
So I can maybe give you a reference point as to maybe why that might be like that, right? So when these cars came to America, as you can tell, like the Legacy Spec B had the taller 5th and 6th, and then like you look at the demographic of who buys that car, and it's like, okay, so that's going to be a more adult person that wants that limited edition wagon, the older, maybe slightly more responsible. They're buying it as it's a kind of performance limited edition run wagon, as a kind of a fast, fun little commuter old guy car. And then you have the STI that's like, that car is going to get it, they know is going to get beat on. It's the fancier than the WRX. It's better than the WRX, so people are going to
the answer for why this happened the way it did has been very obvious for a very long time. Okay, it had nothing to do with that longer 5th and 6th, and what it had to do. First off, the STI got here way before the Spec B did. Okay, so long story short, California screwed us. Okay.
Oh, did they?
Like, their ungodly, crazy emission standards. It's the reason we got a 2.5 and not a 2-liter also. And
I didn't know that.
Lower octane fuel.
It was that they wanted to make 300 horsepower and couldn't do it on a 2-liter and still meet emission standards. But it was a whole lot easier to do it with 91 octane with 2.5 liters.
Yeah, so, our high octane in America is significantly lower than in Japan. So they use a different scale, but still, it's
you can totally see by the way that, like, if you go into a Japanese domestic market ROM and the way they're tuned, like they don't run a lot of boosts. They throw a boatload of timing at shit. It's crazy.
I I could see the benefit of the slightly shorter ratio into fifth gear, as
So
you would have
in
like younger
Japan,
people that buy them.
well,
Well,
in Japan, going back to this, in Japan, the gear ratios all made sense, first through sixth.
yeah,
And because you had
Yep.
80, it was thought out, 8,200 RPM red line, first through sixth makes sense. This matches this. We don't give a shit about gas mileage standards or any of that shit, okay?
yeah,
But in the States, they decided to make the 2.5 liter the motor they went with, and they did that very late. Okay.
yeah.
So they're like, well, shit, this transmission sucks with a 7,000 RPM red line, and we have to make some cafe
Oh,
standards. So they put this really long fifth and sixth in there, totally for gas mileage and emissions purposes.
Mhm.
That is the only reason that it's in there, and it totally screwed us. And then, so in
yeah,
07, when they put the longer first through fourth in, that was to be like, okay, the 2.5 is going to be staying around. It's about to become the world motor everywhere now. We need to do something, and they put that really long first through fourth in, but didn't put the fifth and sixth that they already put in the spec B in there, because they wanted it to still be the fun car.
I could see that. I could also see it could be like a warranty perspective too, because you put a shorter fifth gear in something, and I mean, I can understand. I have friends that back in the day would just like, they'd go out and top stuff out, and having that shorter fifth, it like most people are kind of like they don't really push it. Like there's a point when the Subaru's chassis is kind of unhappy, and like going into fifth gear, not a lot of people I know do 6 gear pulls in their Subaru. But having that slightly shorter fifth gear for someone that just doesn't know anything about engines and just stuffed it in fifth, I think that's a little bit nicer on
engine. Probably cause them more warranty claims than less, though, because they put that longer fifth in there, and during that time period, still to now, these silly kids are going to go out and they're going to try to roll race Mustangs, okay? And they're going to put that thing in fifth, and that gear jump from fourth to fifth is huge, and it's just a shitload of load. It's just making a ton of load on that engine, and they blow shit to pieces.
In the short, you mean in the short ratio, like 06 era?
I'm talking like I'm talking like 07 and onward though, when the fourth to fifth is really close. I could see that being a little bit more beneficial, because like if you race an Evo in a later car, they're like fifth gear is like the perfect gear to drive away from an Evo, because they have to rev them to like 9,800, because they have like closer to what a JDM STI trans has.
And then good luck getting into that next gear with shift lock out with an Evo at 9,800.
For sure.
Have fun with that, bud.
Oh yeah, and then they'll shift it into fifth and throw the rods out of it, like on those things.
So in the modern STI trans, is the last comment, we can move on. Top of fourth gear is about 110, and top of fifth gear is something like 135. So first of all, 110 is all you would ever need out in the real world. And secondly, fifth gear is not very much higher than fourth gear. So it's just the whole thing. Fifth gear just does not make any sense. And then lastly, if you're going into sixth, that is really a lot. That's a bigger drop. Yeah, it's a big drop, and then it's kind of scary when, like, I've only done it once, but getting into sixth gear for reasons, it's a lot. It's scary.
You're turning a big gear, and you have a lot of air resistance. You're making all the damn boost.
It took you a while to get there.
It is so hard on the engine.
Underneath the hood of the car, you could physically see through the up pipe. The wastegate wants to disconnect itself from the up pipe. There's so much bad stuff going on in a car like that at that level. I've seen people who top stuff out, and I've seen the.
I gotta be real. It's one of the reasons I don't want to go to Road America, because I'm going into sixth gear. I'm going into sixth gear 3 times in one lap.
Gosh,
it is screaming fast, and it's so hard on an engine that it's just like, I don't know, man. And maybe if the car was a little more aerodynamic or something, but I don't know, dude. And like, you're pushing so much air, and it's a lot. It's an absolute lot. So we got to start getting to some of these questions, because I know Warranty's got a whole list of them.
Oh, we have so many questions. I think I'm up to 15.
I want to hit. I don't know if you've been pulling them out of here, but the 100X to the Moon guy asked, is the triple disc clutch bad for a transmission?
No, but the long answer, I could give you the really good description of why.
Yeah.
Okay.
So let's actually go our clutches in general. depending on what it
All
is,
right.
bad, because you could probably hit all of that then.
I can. I'll do it all. Okay,
Yep.
so it won't be 10 minutes. So the clutches, right? So you have different clutches. That you have your stock clutches, right? And those are an organic based, with out of the factory. They're a decent clutch. They don't have the best engagement feel, but they handle a good bit of power from the factory. And then so most people will drive their car and they'll burn through the first clutch, and then what is every 16 to 25-year-old guy that burns his first clutch out of a Subaru from doing stuff. They go to like, oh, I got to upgrade this. Everybody says that like, well, if I'm going to replace it, I might as well spend just a little bit more money on that better aftermarket clutch. And then so a lot of what I see people do, they'll go from the OEM STI clutch to a Exedi HD Street SS. And it's something along those lines. There's the HD
HDSS is their first one
Yeah.
that they go to. Yep. That tends to
A
be
lot of people
everybody's
do that.
first upgrade. Yeah.
Yeah, so people go to that clutch. It has a noticeably heavier pressure plate. I'm not a very big fan of the HD Street. I am more of a fan of the Street SS as even on a upgraded turbo car, because the pressure plate isn't really stiff. And I say that from the transmission builder perspective. It's going to be easier on your firewall. It's going to be easier on everything relating to the clutch system because it's pushing up against a weaker spring.
So just to make sure we got the models right, because people will ask, and I will get blown up about this. The two clutches he's referring to are the HDSS and the XDSS. The HDSS is more of the very street-oriented, like kind of chill one. The XDSS is that is a brutal pressure.
A lot of people will see both, and they don't really maybe understand what the difference is between the two. Yeah. And it is primarily the pressure plate.
Because a lot of people think going bigger means it's going to be more reliable.
Yeah, they think that, and then they're out of So what from my side of things, right? So okay, well, I've made that decision, and I accidentally bought that XHD Extreme, whatever it is, your ridiculously high horsepower capacity single. What is the downside of that? Well, as a transmission rebuilder, I get probably 3 to 4 transmissions a year that I am replacing the bell housing on, because as those clutches wear over the course of their life, they're a really aggressive cerametallic disc. They will wear the disc on the clutch, the flywheel, and the pressure plate. So you have a fair bit of clutch. The overall thickness of the clutch changes like a good bit throughout the lifespan of it because you're wearing more than one component in there. So what tends to happen is over the life of the clutch, you get out of the throw of the fork, and in many cases, the most people will notice their clutch pedal starts to get stiffer, and it starts to get harder to put the car in first gear, and they keep driving it. And then what the unfortunate failure is as that happens, you have the fulcrum where the pivot is on the clutch fork it extends the slave cylinder to the point that it's no longer a very geometrically sound, like you're side loading the fork pivot a lot as the clutch wears out. And what will happen sometimes, it's not all the time, sometimes installer error and not torquing the hex plug, sometimes that can come loose and the pin can slide out and then it breaks one of the ears off. But what I'll see is sometimes with the HD Extreme, the heavy pressure plate clutches, as it wears out, that angle doesn't work out very well, and they smack it, no lift it, or do whatever they're doing in their car, and it breaks the pivot out of the bell housing. So then they have to swap a $500 bell housing, and they have to have that conversation with me of like, okay, well, now I got to swap this out. And at that point, a new clutch should be in the discussion there. And that's kind of one of the errors I see with people doing the extreme single clutches. The drivability is not as good. Everybody's makes the joke online. If you're not familiar with it and you haven't driven one of these cars, I get it. A lot of people haven't. I don't actually own one, but I've driven enough to where I can just tell you the drivability is not as good, and the grab point isn't as intuitive. You don't have as much control, and that's the first thing you notice when you get your first good clutch, where you spend a good amount of money because you've now done it a second time. You go for a twin disc, and then at that point you have more surface area to take up the torque capacity. And on those clutches, there's 2 different versions. You have your cerametallic ones, like your Exedi Hyper Twin, and then you have your Exedi organic twin, and then you have like your ACT mod twin that's a organic style clutch.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of X Clutch. Makes a really nice big disc organic that I sell the living shit out of because I just love that clutch. But it's a big disc organic twin, and because you have so much surface area, you don't need to have a very heavy pressure plate. So it drives
drivability is better.
Lovely.
And those clutches are cool because you're now at the point of you have a twin clutch, and you have the 800-ish or 600 to 800 foot-pound of torque capacity of a clutch. At that point, as you have upgraded the car probably at this point, and you're buying the clutch because your setup needs it. This is where the car gets like really exciting to drive. This is where you can launch the car into a spin, like where you have enough clutch to overcome traction, and with the twins, you have enough control where you can manage and control the car doing that. Where if you have a really ridiculous, really ridiculous single clutch, you'll struggle to do that in a manner that doesn't break a lot of parts. And
because it's an on-off.
Right.
Yeah, it's on off, and that's what they mean when they say that. And especially with the ceramic disc, you don't have any I think it's called swale, and that's spring built into the clutch friction surface itself. So where an OEM clutch, it has a progressive engagement.
Just learned a new word.
Yeah, those OEM clutches have a spring built into behind the organic friction material, and that allows progressive engagement where you see your ceramic stuff doesn't. Sometimes they'll do some stuff to tweak that where they will kind of put some twist in the pads themselves, so you have slight engagement, but after a certain amount of time that is no longer in effect. But yeah, some of that stuff I have seen, and so like a good twin, like from my perspective, I'm a big fan of the Exetti twin, and I understand it's an expensive clutch. I think they're like they're like $2,500 probably, roundabout. And then the other one that Josh Bader, who I trust, he's had enough clutches in different cars. He really likes the ACT Mod Series twin disc, and a lot of people have really liked that clutch. And after having driven one, I do like it a lot. If you were looking at what's better, like overall,
I need to get you into a car with one of those X Clutch twins. They're big disc twin. I think you'd be amazed, and they're only like $1,500, which is
I think it's similar with the mod.
So what you end up with is your options are an ACT HDSS, the basic street. So if you're going to be making 400 or less, that's probably fine if you're okay with a little heavier clutch. Or you spend an extra $500 and then this drives lovely. And it's also, like you said earlier, a lot less of an issue of screwing up your firewall because you've got this heavy ass clutch, all sorts of shit. Like it drives nicer. The only downside to twins though, and I want to make sure this is thrown out there, almost every twin, I've never driven a twin that doesn't do this. It's gonna rattle at least a little bit when you push the clutch in. It's the downside. Well, that and the cost, but it's gonna rattle. So some
of that stuff is hard some of that stuff's a little bit hard because the sources, trust me, bro, that's a lot of that. And as time's gone on, I've been more confident in my trust me bros. Like when people will bring me a transmission and they're like, this is my goal. And I'm like, well, all right, it's going to be a little bit more, but let's do this. Let's change a ratio out here and switch some gears out or change something. Yeah. And then the customer just wants the best outcome possible, and they can trust that I will provide that. And then that's kind of been a pretty cool thing as time has gone on. And same thing with clutches. It's like I've now driven enough of these cars and troubleshooted enough issues where I'm like, okay, I kind of have a handle on what's good and what kind of can be avoided.
You're starting to get to a spot to where people are coming to you because you're you. Okay. Now before that, they were coming to you because they were told you're a trans guy or something like that. But now you're coming to you. You know what I mean? Hey yo, hey yo.
Trans guy, hey yo.
Come on.
Hey, it was gonna happen. I get that a lot. Like Jonny trans, I get that. It's like, yeah, I know. The joke's funny. I'll laugh at the joke if somebody makes it.
Either way, like it's kind of nice when you get to a point where people come to you and they're like, okay, you're the expert. And that's
Yeah,
something that it took me years to get to that myself, to where people are like, I trust you, whatever you say, this is what we'll do. You know,
yeah,
but if until you get to that point, it's hard to explain to people, even though what you're saying is the same thing you would say now. You know,
yep.
yeah, there is a
The
level of trust me,
questions.
bro. It's tough, man. And then so you got to be able to answer that. What's really wild is once you get a name, people just don't question you. They're just like,
Right.
okay, well, this dude knows what's up, and I'm like, well, shit,
Yeah, and then
dude, you should shave your
yeah,
eyebrows. You'll go faster.
for sure. Yeah, more aerodynamic in the car. That's why I wear a mask in the car. No,
Oh my god.
the so the yeah that stuff is like the best customers. A lot of the good, really good best customers that I kind of have are the ones that are like, yeah, I picked up this swap, I picked up this transmission, I kind of don't really know what's going on with it, but like I just want to go through it because whatever I'm putting it in, I just want to trust it and have it work, and I want it to be good. And so there's like all right, well, that's great. What are your goals with that car? And then I can have that nice conversation of like, yeah, I'm going to drop one of XYZ engines. I'm going to put like a stage 4 engine or whatever. I'm going to put a 6466 on it. And I'm like, all right, cool. So I know like you got this swap out of a '06 STI shell, and this is going in a wagon. And you're like, okay, this is the pound and power I'm making, and this is what my goals are. And it's like, cool. We have a good roadmap of what's going to be successful
Yep.
in that car. And that's what's really cool. And the people that reach out, I answer a good bit of questions just on Instagram of people asking those questions of like, hey, like, this is my goal. What should I do? And even if I'm not the one building their transmission, I'm happy to offer any advice. And then, they might have someone, as me in Portland, Oregon, way here on the West Coast, I get people out on the East Coast that ask questions here and there, and I'm happy to answer any of those questions if anybody reaches out to me. And that's why I like this group, because I can just kind of answer any questions anyone ever brings up in the chat, because it helps. I'm not trying to plug my own stuff, but it's like,
you're
I can
fine.
offer good advice there.
I mean,
So
it ain't like
You
we're
are doing the
building
Lord's
trances.
work.
We ain't
I'm doing the
building
Lord's
trances.
work.
IAG ain't building trances anytime soon. And if you're building
Yep.
trances and there's a good chance, you're gonna need synchros and shit, we do sell that, and then hell, you end up it's good, baby.
Yeah.
It's all good. All
Yep.
right, we gotta
It's
we
cool
gotta continue on
We
answering
have a list
questions
of
though.
questions. Okay.
So
Yep.
there was
and
another
then,
one that came up a second ago, and this is something that I'm sure this is going to be a bit of a rabbit hole. But somebody asked, "Is the Spec C oil cooler for the trans necessary for track use?" And what I want to actually go down the rabbit hole with is, how much do you see people ignoring trans temperatures, and how much of a play or how much of an effect is that having on wear?
so it's a little loaded. The wear on the transmission, as what I see,
You're doing a lot of
the,
drag trances too. So like, I don't know. I don't know how many golf course
so
trances you do. I should really like send one of mine to you and see what's left of it.
right, I would appreciate that. That would be pretty cool. I would love to see what kind of stuff you tear up in a high long stress, like an endurance
Yeah.
style transmission. So the transmission temperature thing is not something that is really monitored ever by anybody ever. The OEM STIs have that rear diff temp sensor, and I could see with a hypoid gear and that small of a housing, I could see a temp sensor being necessary. With the transmission and it being attached to the car, and it having fins that are underneath it for just the airflow into the car, cooling it. Those things, I see that in the trans kind of being enough, with just it being heat synced to the engine. Now I see more of what I see is the transmission actually never really gets hot enough, and there's a phenomenon with oil, and it has nothing to do with the operation. But if you've ever like driven an STI in really cold weather, it's not like the best shifting thing until you get it right on the freeway and it warms up. But there's kind of this temperature range, above maybe 110 degrees, where the oil viscosity comes up, and that's where it starts to shift good. And then from about 110 to maybe 160 is probably the average operating range of an STI transmission, and that's good and great. And they operate in that range. That's kind of where they're designed to be. operated in from what Subaru did with the cars and the cooling system. That they have the heat that comes off of the cooling stack in the car that goes underneath the car, and the exhaust out pipe and all the stuff that's in proximity to the trans. That stuff puts temperature into the transmission, and it kind of has its temperature window of running in. Now, the one thing I'll see is like customers will kind of extend their maintenance intervals, or they won't know to change the fluid in their trans. And you can tell a transmission that's never seen very much heat in its whole life when you take it apart and there is varnish on everything. So it's like this kind of brown, kind of like when you don't change your oil in your engine, it kind of looks brown inside the oil cap. Same thing in a transmission. From a smart oil guy that I trust from Driven Racing, he says that you pick up a car. Let's say you're getting into track day stuff, and you pick up like an older BMW chassis. You would be doing yourself a favor to the first couple times out in that car is to change the oil, and like every time you go out, every couple hours, because as oil temperature comes up, the sort of garbage can lid on the oil and the chemical properties in the oil, that garbage can lid opens up, and then the oil starts to pick up contamination and pick up that varnish that's inside of the transmission inside of the engine. So like when something gets warm, and that's one of the things that STI transmissions never really get that warm. So it's kind of one of those things I recommend, maintain your fluid interval. Like these cars were designed to sort of be driven a certain way from the factory. If you double the abuse and you double the horsepower, I mean, you should half the service interval, like how on engines we generally accept it on a completely stock STI that's your daily driver. You realistically could do an oil change every 5,000 miles, and it could be okay. Now you do performance driving in that, and you run on ethanol, or you have a full bolt-on tune car. That's when you lower that interval down because you put more load on things, and you want that ability for the oil to pick up contamination. And the same thing with the transmission. As a transmission wears, it produces a fine, silky, very fine micron debris in the oil. And in a situation so for anyone that's ever servicing their transmission at home, this is kind of how you do a health check at home. When you do a health check is you drain the fluid, you look at the magnet, with gloves on, you sweep the magnet with your finger, and you rub that material between your fingers, and that will tell you where the metal is coming from. So fine, silky material between your fingers, like if it doesn't feel like there's anything but oil between your fingers, that's hypoid gear wear. That's the gear teeth themselves, just in constant mesh. That's the metal and wear that comes from those, and the metal that comes off of just bearings and stuff in the transmission. Now, if you rub your fingers together and it feels gritty, and you kind of know that you've been abusing it, and maybe it's picking up a fourth gear grind that's not quite detectable yet with your hand, that's where you'll kind of see it on the magnet. You'll get what's more like a sandy kind of a feeling between your fingers, a little gritty, and it'll just feel like fine sand or sugar or salt.
What happens when you do that and you find a whole damn gear tooth?
You're either a 5-speed owner, or you either know it's a WRX and you've come to terms, or generally like in a 6-speed, you won't find gear teeth in the oil. But for just the sake of I drained the oil out and this is what I found, there's a couple different things you'll find. Hey, it happens in rear diffs all the time. People I know that are high horsepower Subarus, they're like, just change the oil blindfolded. There's going to be something on the magnet. Just ignore it. But the transmission itself, generally speaking, you shouldn't have that. Transfer gear failure in a 5-speed, that happens if you've ever improperly towed it, or you did a bunch of snow drifting and you hurt the viscous in it. It'll act more like a welded center diff, or potentially what will happen is the bearing in the back will fail. It happens a number of ways, but generally you overheat the viscous. The viscous is a sealed unit. It presses apart like a piston. Sometimes it will shoot a snap ring into the transfer gears, and you'll find gear teeth and a lot of metallic material, and the oil will smell sulfur-y, and that's in a 5-speed. That is like okay, let's get it out, let's fix it before the housings are junk. In a 6-speed, they don't have failures as much like that, but you'll find you'll know when a gear failure happens, or you miss a gear really badly, or something bad happens. You'll kind of know. Sometimes if you grind it bad enough, you'll physically lose the ability to shift first to second or second to third to fourth, where you round the engaging teeth over so far that they will no longer slide on the slider. So you might still be able to get it into fourth, but it's rough, but it won't go into third. That's a pretty common issue on those. And yeah, just fluid changes will tell you the health of your transmission, and looking at the magnet. Rear diffs are a whole other thing I'm not as deep into. I don't know as much about, but similar thing can be, you can see the health by what you're finding on the magnet. And catching things is good. You'll see non-metallic stuff where the oil will be shimmery, but there won't be a lot on the magnet. That's a sign in like a 6-speed that you're having fork wear. So maybe you've blasted through the fork pad, or you see a little bit of plastic come out of the oil drain,
Yeah,
and you're like, what the hell is that?
That's that little Teflon pad. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little pad there.
Guy.
Yeah, it's time to upgrade the forks. So non-ferrous material in the oil can be a sign of like forks and stuff like that. And then whatever's on the magnet, I kind of gave the idea of what kind of you're seeing from there. The other thing on 6-speeds that, because I've built enough of them and I go through them, is the DCCD unit is an oil filter. Even if it's not on the spec sheet, it's saying it's an oil filter. It is basically a coffee can, and oil gets fed into it on one side, and it spins at a high velocity. It spins at ground speed, and as it spins at ground speed, it wants to wick all the oil out of it, and that flat surface inside will centrifugally filter your oil out. So any contamination in the oil will have a tendency to settle around the outside of a DCCD unit. It won't cause any failure, won't cause any problems, but like when I go through them, I always take them apart and clean them because nothing is worse than not doing that. And then the customer goes 500-600 miles, changes the fluid, and they're like, yo, bro, there's a lot of metal in this. And, I did my job and I cleaned all the metal out of everything, but then there was still metal trapped in the DCCD, and that's a lot of where it can come from. And that's why regular fluid changes are good, because the magnet on a...
What do you recommend for fluid?
Motul 7590.
Yep.
Gear 300 7590.
So we actually had some decent luck with stepping up in our track cars. I'd be interested to see what you thought of the wear, but we went up to a 75 130?
75 140?
140, yeah. Whatever the
so that's
shit is.
Right. So that's a heat range thing, and if you look at the service manual, you can see it tells you the API specification on what temperature the oil is designed to run within. So 7590 is a split weight oil, and it has a broader range of operation. So the people that have STIs in Alaska, when they're starting their car up at 0 degrees, and that they got to fire their car up, and the transmission's got to operate, and the oil's got to do its job. Its effective range is like from 0 degrees to 220 degrees or somewhere in there within its viscosity range. Then 90 weight is good from, it's about 20 degrees Fahrenheit up to the same operating range as the 7590. So it doesn't matter 90 weight versus 7590. Now in your situation, like what I was saying earlier with the temperature on things and it not shifting is good. The thicker viscosity oil is great when the transmission is warm, and there is nothing against running that, but you need to understand that the transmission is not going to shift as good cold. So that's legitimately something where you want to avoid smacking it into gear hard, as the synchronizer and the slider and the internal components that make a manual transmission shift are dealing with thick honey oil, and in the same way that you wouldn't beat on your really ice cold engine with 2050 in it, same thing with your transmission with 75 140. You might want to get get it moving a half mile or so to get the fluid moving and up a couple degrees in temperature to have smooth operation. And if you don't do that, it's not a problem. It just won't shift as good, and you'll get wear on the engaging teeth when it's cold.
It shows when it's like anything under 60 degrees, like cruising through the pits at first, until we get about halfway through that warm-up lap. It doesn't feel great, but it's, I tell you what, when we're at speed, it's where it's at. So.
Yep, and so in your engine, you have oil that's designed to protect components at a certain given temperature. In your transmission, it's the same way. And like the brass synchronizer rings inside of a transmission, if you're blessed with the factory brass synchronizer rings, that's a joke, by the way. those synchronizer rings aren't as efficient as the composite lining.
Yeah.
And in cold scenarios, that's where like 5-speeds don't shift as good, and where your all brass synchronizer ring transmissions don't shift as good, especially like on an STI in the 4th, 5th, and 6th, as they're not relying on as much surface area on the physical component to make those synchronized shifts. The thicker weight oil you'll be able to tell, and that's where a carbon or a composite ring is a benefit in there. And anybody that is beating on those cars knows that it seems like this isn't verified by anyone, but in 2018, I believe Subaru changed their blend on their gear oils, and it got considerably worse, or there was less protection in the oil itself. And a lot of the 18 and onward transmissions, people complain of a 4th gear. Oh, did I have problems?
I can hear you, Dewey. Can you hear me?
Are we good?
It messaged me.
Are we still good? Are we still alive?
I can hear you. I can't hear Dewey at the moment.
Oh, I don't think he said anything. I've just been talking.
I think Dewey's internet died. All right, well.
Okay, well, either way, I can keep going. So, yeah, so like in a 15 and onward or a 08 plus transmission with the factory brass synchronizers and stuff, if you have an 09 and onward transmission, you have the factory brass synchros. And what tends to happen on those is people will modify the cars. They will operate them in a high RPM window with a factory style clutch or just any clutch. And as you're trying to get it into 4th gear, you have a limited, let's say, brake pad size on the synchronizer. And
right.
as you beat on it, what can happen, so the synchronizer's job is to get the shaft and the gear spinning at the same speed. And what it is overcoming is the weight of the input shaft and the clutch. So the heavier your clutch is, and this is something about performance clutches where I like the Exetti Twin, the rotating mass is low. Well, on a factory STI clutch, the rotating mass is all on the outside. It's kind of high. And as you move to a 6 puck, they get lighter. So the synchronizer does less work to get it into gear. So when you have those cars where they've done everything but the clutch at this point, and they're shifting it at high RPM, what can happen is the synchronizer isn't able to synchronize properly, and what can happen is you can overwhelm the synchronizer's ability to synchronize the gears. And what will sometimes happen is you will get brass transfer from the synchro itself to the cone of the gear. And when that happens, it kind of smears onto the face on the cone of the gear. It'd be like if your brake pad, if the rotor were to wear away into the pad, or if the rotor transferred into the pad. At that point, you have a brass on brass, which brass as a metal is more slippery than steel. And when you have a transmission with a brass on brass, it can not as easily go into gear. So the synchronizer may not be worn out, but you had the transfer, and then it no longer wants to do its job effectively. And that's generally what I see a good bit of. And I think that the gear oil viscosity, or the gear oil change from Subaru, kind of caused that a little bit. And then other than that, yeah, it made it a little bit worse, or they shift a little bit worse. And that's the importance I place on putting a good quality oil in your transmission. You change it, once every 5 times you change your engine oil, or 10 times you change your engine oil, depending. And just having good quality fluid, as you're not changing it as often. Yeah, it's $80 and it sucks. But having the best stuff in there that you can is good for the life of it. And changing it is good as well.
So I think regular duty is every 30,000 miles. So that's about every 10 oil changes, depending on how long people are doing it. And then severe duty is 15K, or do I have those numbers lower?
That's pretty much dialed in. As severe duty, when you call it severe duty, those are the people that are changing their oil every 3,000 miles. So every 5 oil changes, that puts you right at the 15K mark. And it's something that you don't know until you change it and you see what's in the oil. And you're like, oh, if it's really dark, it's like, oh, I probably could have changed that a little earlier. Or occasionally I'll get customers that have no idea, and then I'll have 2015 STI transmission with numbers matching gear oil in it from when it was a brand new car, and the car has a 4th gear grind with 98,000 miles on it, and it's got the original oil in it. And I'm like, well, the synchro's not even worn out, but it's just
Did you
ineffective
just say
because the
numbers
oil's so
matching
bad.
gear oil?
Yeah, that's
funny.
that's a long-standing.
Sorry, I'm having some weird internet issues, by the way, guys. I'm bouncing in now. If I'm not here,
no problem.
I'm not here. But
no problem. I discussed how the oil affects the way that the transmission shifts, and having how good oil allows the synchronizer to work. So the one other thing that people will ask, everybody asks, is what about that cocktail blend? Nothing.
Yes!
Oh God!
Let's
Let's
talk
go.
Nothing.
Let's go.
Uncle Scotty's boy. Let's talk about it.
It's
Uncle
the
Scotty's
hotly
cocktail from
the
10 years
hot the
ago.
hot
No, more.
yeah the hotly debated cocktail of blends of transmission fluid, right? So as I was saying, right, like you get those later transmissions where they have the brass synchronizers, and you shift them at a higher RPM, and you wear out that 4th gear synchro or you potentially beat that 4th gear synchro out of the transmission. You don't beat it out of the transmission, but you have that brass transfer, which decreases the synchronizer's ability to work, as it's a brass on brass interface when it gets damaged. At that point, you have a situation where you need less slippery oil to properly engage the 4th gear, 5th gear, or the gear that had the transfer.
So you dump liquid sandpaper into your shit.
You effectively, yes, there is different properties with those. So as I know the cocktail of being shockproof and MT90, I believe that's the cocktail that everyone knows of, right?
It's something like that. Yeah, Uncle Scotty's cocktail.
That's
right.
from forever ago. So let me get this straight. Are you supporting it in limited circumstances, or saying categorically this is a bad idea?
Okay, there's a lot of ways to look at it, and generally, as a transmission builder, do what works for you. Choose the oil viscosity that's set for the car. So that's like going out and buying a car. You're buying a wagon because you need a wagon. And then choose the brand that suits your taste. It's the same thing with gear oil. And I can give the recommendation of Motul. And then, you might have success and you might not have success with that. And going on the viscosity recommendation, it's the 75/90 or 90 weight.
Bro, this is the most non-answer I've ever heard. Okay, yo.
So,
it sounded like it helped.
Okay, here's what I want to know. You are a trans builder. Yes or no? Is that shockproof shit, Uncle Scotty's cocktail, okay in our transmissions? It's specifically the 5-speed, because the 6-speed doesn't have the issues nearly as much.
Okay, so that
I don't want to hear some political bullshit, Johnny.
All right, Dewey. So the answer is try it if it works for you and helps you in your circumstances. I'm not for or against it. I take them apart, and that's it's not one way or another. If the components look okay, the components are usually worn at that point. You have a hard part in the transmission. Right. So you have a hard part in the transmission that is no longer effective. To get you by, a fluid change is one of the more easy things to do than fixing the actual problem. So if it gets you by and it works for you, that's great. Now, from my experience, that fluid, in theory, shouldn't work. And in other transmissions I tried it in a front-wheel drive Volkswagen transmission. It would not shift at all. The synchronizer was unable to do its job because it was too slippery in that transmission. But in Subaru, somehow, with the magic of how they operate, it works. And if it shifts better with the shockproof for you, great. If I rebuild the transmission and I go through it and put all carbon rings from the IAG, like the IAG carbon 1 through 6, it's less necessary. You don't need that. Now, if it works for you, great.
I'm gonna give
I don't like it.
Much less politically correct. Look, do not put redline shockproof inside of your Subaru Trans. And what he's saying is the nice way of saying this, but long story short, if you put something that abrasive in a Trans where the synchronizer isn't working right, yeah, it's going to feel great for a short period of time. But just like sandpaper, it's going to wear that shit out even faster. So yeah, it might work for about a couple of months, but then there ain't no coming back from that. because of what you've just done. The fix is to put a new synchro in. It isn't put some magic Dewey juice in that shit.
then there's, I mean, I hate to say it, Dewey, but then there's people like Josh and the people like Devin and Amelia on YouTube. And then there's just other people out there that do in like an STI, let me tell you specifically, STI, where they put 20, 30,000 miles on a transmission with that fluid in it, and it's no problem, but they're shifting it off of a 7,800 RPM limiter and shoving 700 horsepower through it and no lifting and beating the brakes off of it. Like, there's other things in the transmission that are a concern that the fluid, it's just good that there's fluid in it.
So what you just said was a bunch of drag guys, though.
Right. But for everyday stuff, I don't think that's going to help.
So let me. If you thought you're getting off on this one easy, you can just hold the fucking phone. All right.
Okay.
So straight up, I can understand in a drag situation, the synchros are getting worn. You throw some shockproof in it, get a little grit to where you need to. Maybe the trans lasts you the rest of the season or whatever to the next time you blow something the fuck up, which you're gonna, because you drag race and you got a lot of horsepower and it is what it is.
Yeah.
And then you pull the thing apart and get things sorted out. Sweet. This is not a magic fix for some guy who's got 200,000 miles on his trans and he wants to get 400,000 miles out of it. And she's a little rough going back into first. She sticks shockproof in it, okay? And all of a sudden thinks that the trans is fixed. And 10,000 miles later, it feels 3 times worse.
For example, I do take apart a lot of 5-speeds that have very fresh shockproof in them. So there's your answer there. It does not fix the problem. It is a Band-Aid, and it might work for you.
It might work for a very short period of time.
On a 5-speed, it might work for you.
And
on a
this
6-speed, it might work for you as well.
I'll even go as far as to say, if you're in a competition setting, and you need this trans to function better for a short period of time, and you need this Band-Aid, sure, don't shockproof in it. Just know that the trans is trash the second you do it.
Yeah. I from the rebuild perspective, I don't love it. And as you say, it's like sand, right? Well, when you take it apart and you take apart a transmission that's had multiple shockproof,
garbage.
If it's been sitting, especially if it's been sitting, or if it's got some like low, what I'll call it, like low duty cycle stuff where you go out drive it here, there, short trips. It slings the oil around, and then in like cheese, I guess, I don't know, it separates and it leaves what I call like mustard on everything, and then it like as it drains away, the blue Smurf juice drains away. And then it leaves like what looks like Dijon mustard throughout the whole thing. So I got a lot of brake clean on hand for these customers that bring me these transmissions with shockproof in them. And then in the DCCD, in the same way, you pull a Dijon mustard transmission DCCD apart, like it's full of whatever there's the liquid and the solids like to stay in the DCCD, and they like to stay and stuff. So generally, when I rebuild stuff, I appreciate IAG for having all composite rings. Because oil becomes less of a factor in those. And so I can clean them out really good, and we can put a good quality synthetic oil in them, and they will live and shift and drive really great for forever. But it's one of those things where, like, if you need that fluid to Band-Aid you to get you by, I get it. Not everybody has like unlimited, it might be their only car. And that's the, okay, you can put that in there, but no, like, this will only work for so long, and you'll have a discussion with me, and I'll kind of give you I'm happy to give numbers. Like, generally when I rebuild stuff, you get a transmission like that's like, okay, I put shockproof in, it still grinds on 4th. It's like, okay, we got to go through it, and we got to put synchros in it, and if it grinded for a long time, there's going to be some other hard parts it damaged. We're looking at like $1,500, $1,600, $1,700, from my end of rebuilding something. And then let's say we have the guy that wants to make it all like brand new inside because they know they beat the trash out of it. You really start to get around that like $2,000, $2,200 range when you replace the sliders and any of the damaged or worn gears or shifting components. And then you flat foot them and you beat them up, and it hurts the forks. So generally, like anything that's been abused, we do forks. There's those kind of things. But yeah, shockproof will get you by if you need it.
All right. Okay.
Again,
oh my gosh. So we just fought you for like 15 minutes straight, and you just said that shockproof makes it more expensive to rebuild.
everything about what you just said was a negative of shockproof. Then he goes, well, shockproof, forget you. Shockproof will get you through, like, and again, with a drag car, I understand because you're not putting a ton of money. Okay, I get it for that. And
Yeah.
it's if you're just dumping it in there thinking it's going to be like Marvel's mystery oil that fixes your everything, it's not. And it's not a long-term solution. And if so the only time I'll condone it is drag car makes sense. Okay. It's not going to see enough miles, like competition only drag car or competition only, whatever you might be doing. Let's say you're at a grid life weekend for some dumbass reason, you're on a 5-speed and you're just grinding like hell every time. And if maybe throwing some shockproof in there is less of a chance that you're going to break something. Okay, maybe that makes sense. Run some shockproof for the weekend, but understand that the core issue here is the synchronizer, and you have to fix that.
Yeah, there is that. And in 5-speeds especially, like you got a 3rd or 4th gear grind. I mean, you might have a modified car, but know that like with that grind and with you driving that car with that grind, your shock when it grinds going into gear, you're creating a harsh vibration and shock to the components inside. So the already relatively weak 3rd gear, having a grind like the 3rd and 4th, if you have a grind going into that gear, like you're going to really significantly reduce the overall lifespan of the transmission and those gears in particular. If it does grind going into gear and you shift it hard, it grinds and it just has to knock one tooth off for the whole to need to have a whole new 3/4 put in it. And that's a tough thing, especially a lot of people have like one car. So I always suggest like I don't own a Subaru. And it's because I know the way that I drive, I am hard on my stuff. And so, I know what I can and cannot have. But some people, it's their only car, and you got to do what you got to do to get by to be able to drive your car. And I can understand some of those Band-Aids.
All right, Warranty,
we got a list of questions.
You got a heap of questions. Give us a new question. So we got to get off fucking shockproof before I start punching.
Sorry. I'm trying to cover more than just that with the
this is good.
No, you're good. No, this is good. I'm just being that guy.
We might need to have you come back because I have a list of like 15 questions and we've been through about 3. So
for sure, yeah. Let's bang through some and I'll give you some shorter.
All right. Yeah, or come back. But hey, next one.
Sure.
What is your opinion of 5-speed transmissions or 5+1? So anything WRX, it's a weaker transmission. In your opinion, is there any saving grace in using a 5-speed?
Yeah, they came stock. A lot of people, that's what's in their car, and there's nothing wrong with it.
Can I add something? I want to hear his thoughts on blast plates.
Yeah,
another
so
thing
I wish I knew the backstory. I heard from the guy that got me into Subarus. He had some amazing story on how those existed, and like I guess there was a company that originally made those, and they actually would warranty the transmission if it had problems with their product. But I think there was something ridiculous tied to that, like you had to ship the car to Russia or something for them to install it. And I just remember that being like the story, and I thought it was absolutely hilarious.
Dude, you wouldn't even know. Like, there's been like 6 companies over the past 25 years, 20 years, whatever, that have went through and said the blast plates are the answer to fix the 5-speed trans. A whole heap of people are like, holy shit, this is amazing. I can't wait. A bunch of cars blow up. The company disappears. 3 years later, some other company, completely unrelated, says, okay, here's the fix. It's blast plates. And it's so funny. Okay, go. Long story short, blast plates don't work. It's snake oil.
There's warrants, there's you would think, your brain would tell you it would work, but when you see them and how they're put together, in a way that the case halves in a Subaru, you have stock case bolts, the case it's not it's the case bolt, it's still bolted together, so you can only improve it by you could technically improve a 5-speed by putting better fasteners in the case. I could actually see that making some Yeah, I mean, I could see that making a slight improvement to it, but like with better fasteners, and that's like a lot of why the blast plates might arbitrarily handle more horsepower, or there might be like some one person out there actually legitimately held more power with blast plates. It's likely due to better or worse fasteners depending on whatever company supplied them, but in the broad spectrum of transmissions, like if I have a 2005 WRX, will bolting blast plates on it improve the transmission in any capacity? No, don't waste your time, because you'll probably have to mostly drop the transmission to get them to bolt on. So just don't do it. I wouldn't. It's just save up for the next rebuild.
If you're dropping a 5-speed Subaru Trans for any reason, the only thing that should be going back in it is a 6-speed.
Yeah.
or a new clutch, or a new clutch, because the car is completely stock and it's just your daily driver.
That don't count. That don't count. I'm saying if you broke that Trans, put a 6-speed in. Just stop. Put a 6-speed in.
For sure. And like same thing with anybody that ever asks me, should I put a gear set in a 5-speed? Hell no.
No.
A customer had an issue with a PPG 5-speed, and I took it apart and like saw some wear and replaced some sliders and put it back together, and it had blast plates on it. And I left the blast plates on it. I torqued everything to spec how it is OEM, and I just sent it on its way. And I haven't heard back from him. But if it scatters, I'm not going to be surprised. It's not my fault.
One scenario that a 5-speed makes any sense, and it's if some sanctioning body that you are racing in forces you to keep that Trans. It is the only argument that I will hear that
in any motorsport, yes. Any form of racing, yes.
Yes. No, it's different if, like, again, stock car, it's in your car, and it's doing fine. That doesn't mean a holy shit, like, stop everything, I need to throw this Trans out. If it's fine, it's fine. But it's not, it's not.
Yeah, the other thing, because there's a question that gets asked usually, like, what's the difference between a 5-speed and a 6-speed WRX transmission? They basically added another gear, and then the way that they added another gear, it took up space inside of the transmission, and they had to basically change the way that the shifter works around that change to add the gear in the transmission. Probably some bullshit relating to emissions, so that's why they needed the extra gear in there.
That's why we call it the 5+1. Well, no, that and the 6-speed just sells better. That was a big reason they did it. Like, 6 speeds just are cooler than 5 speeds.
So many kids, so many kids say, is that a 6-speed? I mean, but that doesn't sell you anything.
Yeah, my joke designation is they are the 6 lowercase MT, where the STI has the 6 uppercase MT.
I like 5+1 better.
Yeah, we do 5+1.
5+1. Yeah, so those with those though, there is some things where they some cost cutting measures, and they're generally everything inside of it is pretty small. They handle just as much horsepower as a 5-speed. Maybe just a little bit more. Like your 5-speed limit might be like 380 foot-pounds if you wanted me to put a number on it. And then maybe I would say that the 5+1, that's the limit's probably around 400, but it's not a lot more. But the gears are a little bit different, and they're just a tiny bit wider, and that might gain you less than 5% more strength. And then the other thing with those is getting. It's going to sound counterintuitive, but put a short shifter on a 16 or on a 15 plus 5+1 speed. Short shifter will help. They have issues with shift forks. They have a pretty fragile shift fork design, especially on the 5.6. So by putting a short shifter on it, you increase or you decrease the leverage that you have over the internal components in the transmission, and you will put less force on those pretty fragile shift forks. So that's something that's like a knowledge bomb that not a lot of people would understand or think.
That's actually, like, I never even thought of looking at that way, but that makes sense because you have to put so much more effort into shifting it that it's going to force you to be nicer.
Yeah, and then the problem, right? So on a 6-speed, I don't recommend a short shifter, as it makes the transmission a lot less intuitive. A lot of, like, any of the short shifters I've driven, I 2.5 the car pretty consistently. Like, I don't quite nail that 2.3 the first time every time. Where in a stock,
you're gonna hear me screaming on a 6-speed, like a proper STI 6-speed. You leave the stock shifter in, or you get the Cartboy Tallboy.
The short
Yeah.
throw tall boy.
Yeah, which
And
it really doesn't shorten the throw at all. It just lifts it uses
Yeah.
the geometry of a short throw, but raises
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
shifter up.
Yep.
One other note on 6 speeds, while we're there and the shifting relating parts of it, a lot of people will try to combat shifter slop the wrong way, and it's not always this way. But there's companies that make those little dog bone inserts, and those do work, and they do reduce the overall slop because they remove those little plastic bushings
We're
in
talking
the
about the
shifter.
5+1 speed.
No. The 6 speed STI transmission, right? So
Okay.
that little dog bone that goes between the little thing on the back of the transmission and the
Oh, okay. You're talking about
the connecting
there
arm.
are bushings and stuff there. Yeah, they think that.
Yeah, they have like a little plastic bushing inside of
Yeah.
there, inside of the and that little crossbar thing. So there's a lot of companies that make a brass crossbar. That can work. That can be an upgrade. But where I see slop in a 6 speed shifter, especially side to side, is actually in the component that you physically hammer the roll pin through on the transmission. That component, it's a little crossbar. It has a roll pin that goes through it, and that's what physically attaches to the shift shaft of the transmission. That roll pin hole is tapered, and it's nice. It has a dish shape to it, so that you can easily guide the roll pin in, through the top. I see even on newer like 18 cars where I've been able to see those components, or they bring me the trans with that still attached. There's a good little bit of slop just right there in that component, and I see people fight the wrong. They battle the problem the wrong way, and they replace the crossbar, and that's all good and dandy. But those little plastic bushings inside of that, unless they're gone, they don't really wear out. They're pretty big, and you'll put the brass thing in, and it makes a difference, and it improves the feel. But the little cross piece is
Honestly, that's
the limitation.
Torque Solutions makes that I think is a decent product is that little, cross thingy. And like I even run one myself, but I agree a lot of people replace all the bushings, do a holy shift kit, all sorts of shit. And then the real problem is actually that roll pin is just worn and that whole thing is wiggling.
Yeah, it took me a while. That was a more recent learning thing for me, and it's just something that I like to give that out. It's free. Just have your car be better.
I got a lot of people
$80.
asking about the CAE shifter right now. I've got my own thoughts, but I want to hear what your thoughts are. Or have you got to play with one yet?
I haven't got to play with one, but I have people that recommend it, and I have people that don't. And people that have installed it, they're like, "Man, this thing sucks to install." But they there's generally the improved shift feel, and I think it just kind of moves the pivot points around. And it raises the shifter up, and it reduces the pivot point, but the shifter throw is kind of similar to a short shifter. It's just higher up. If it shifts good for you, and that's what makes you happy and makes you feel good about a transmission, that's great. But I'm not for it or against it. Yeah,
my personal opinion is Mike Omic's car was the first one that I ever seen with it, and he was super excited about it. I sat down, played around with it in his car a little bit.
Yeah, that ka-chunk action. People like that.
And the other thing I don't like about it is the actual mount that it sits on is kind of chintzy, and it tends to flex or fall apart. And I think I like the shift feel of a properly put together like tall boy with some bushings than I do with that, and it's significantly cheaper. And I feel like what gear you're in better. Like some people just rave about the CAE and good on them. I'm not a fan personally.
Yeah, they're good in a lot of stuff. They can be pretty good in a lot of stuff, but it's one of those things that it's personal preference. Same thing with fluid.
The dark matter.
The dark matter, very popular. They make a really great WRX 5+1 shifter. The box, and that's great because that's what you need in those things. It's like $2,000, which that's rough. There's the other question on shifters that I get sometimes, and I was making something and then now I'm not because I saw the product that was made. So there's people will drag race. I do a lot of drag race stuff. People are afraid of dog boxes because they're afraid of money shifting them. And for a bit there, I was making a lockout solution that it was promising and it was working. It definitely needed some further development on it. And then as the race season approached, Josh was connected with Cosmic. Guy David over there is the guy who kind of talks to. They came out with a lockout shifter that legitimately works. It does very good. Their design is very good, and I like everything about it and its operation. It's not a streetcar thing. The way that it is in the car, there's nothing about any bezel that you can keep that's factory. So as a drag car, that's perfect. My solution is a lot more streetcar. It uses the reverse lockout lever, and it's a component that's bolted, like it's physically mounted to the transmission, and it kind of guides you into the gear that you want to be in, where the way that they tackled it was just don't allow the shifter to go back into first. And their solution works absolutely fantastic. And if you're a dog box on the street guy, oh my God, you got some nuts on you if you got a dog box on the street. But those people, that is the good solution that works. And I don't believe I will be continuing any of my own development on my thing because theirs works so good. But also know what your goals with your car are.
Yep.
So. I got a less glamorous question for you since we've been going down the rabbit hole on some cool stuff. We have to make it uncool. All right.
Sure.
So I want to ask you about automatics and CVTs. Do you touch most of them? Do you touch either of those very much?
Yes and no. I don't. And I don't really have a lot of experience with them. There is people that have made a good bit of power through the automatics, like a 4 EAT. I have seen people make... Josh made about 500 horsepower through a 5 EAT in a Forester. There is sort of like an operating system code limitation with those, and I think there's kind of an upper limit unless you're willing to do like a whole bunch of modifications, which is down a rabbit hole that I'm not that familiar with. But I don't think it's developed enough, and not enough people are racing with those where it's like a super viable option. So from my perspective, from what Josh did with his Forester, he did like a factory location FP Black. I got it to around 30 pounds of boost. It slipped. It was a stock engine because it's a stock engine because it was in the car. And it slipped, locked the converter, folded the rods out of the engine, and just scattered it. So that's kind of what can happen on if you try to push an auto. Stock motor, built motor would handle it a little bit more. You might still hurt it. But yeah, just the automatics, I think they're like you can modify a torque converter automatic and have success. There is some torque to be gained in a CVT WRX and drivability with a tune on those. They have a lifespan that I think is shorter than it ought to be with the CVT, and by adding power to it, you are not necessarily helping it in any way. Awesome in theory. In practice, it just didn't really work. I've driven side-by-sides. Those are cool. But as a mechanically minded guy, I've always been a fan of the engine and the crankshaft being tied to a ratio to the rear tire.
You know what else is cool on side-by-sides? Sequentials.
Same thing.
Yes. They doing all sorts of cool stuff. Sequentials, DCTs, all sorts of shit.
Yep. Here's another one for you. Have you had a chance to crack open a second-gen BRZ transmission?
Nope. And unfortunately, on those BRZs, they are... there's a guy over at Off the Line Performance, Grayson. He's relatively well-known on like TikTok. He has posted and been very public about his build on his BRZ, and I think that the factory transmission checks out about 400 horsepower.
Yep.
Third gear, it's like a stick of dynamite when they go. It's pretty awesome, and they just have a weakness like a 5-speed.
I told you, all they did to that, and I've said it before, is they did some synchro shit. That is it.
Yeah.
That is.
I don't think
it's the same trans. There's nothing wrong with it at stock power and what you're doing with it. Up to that 300 power mark, 300 horsepower. If you're gonna do more, you really need to look into that. What the hell is that 350Z trans?
CDO9.
Yeah, the CDO9. You need to do the CDO9 swap.
Yeah, that's from what I've seen as well. And then at that point, like, not to dig the FR or the FRS engines, but I mean, like, there is kind of a platform limitation with that engine. Like, I mean, you have your fuel system limitation that's at like 550. That's the perceived high limit with like race gas and stuff, but like E85, you're around like 400. I mean, just stay within the factory fuel system and, have a backup transmission, and then you enjoy it at that power level. And, people will try to shoot for the moon and make 600 horsepower on something that just will not handle it at all.
BRZ automatics hold more power because it came out of IS300, I think. So it was a heavier.
Oh
power.
yeah, I think those are like a DCT. That could be good.
No, they're not DCT.
No, it's a torque converter automatic
it's just
with
yield
6
auto.
planets.
But I don't know why. That's no fun. Get a CDO9 and be awesome.
Oh no, yeah. All right. So what's my next question? Oh, so you mentioned third gear leaving the chat. Doesn't that also happen on STI transmissions, Dewey?
Yeah. I think a lot of that with us time attack folk is we are constantly smashing ourselves into third. I think we tend to cause early failures on that. I wouldn't say that it's a weakness. Like third gear is somehow like weaker than the other gears. I think it's due to the way we use third gear.
It is central. It is the most central gear on the shaft. So in theory, it is the weakest. They seem to break. It's one way or the other. Flip a coin, whether it's third or fourth. Just depends on how responsive the turbo is. Like something like a 6266 will probably kill third, but it'll probably kill fourth just as quick. Oil pump transmissions and anything that's endurance related, like your 06 style transmission, or your 07 limited if you want a oil pump long ratio transmission. The 07 limiteds came with the oil pump with the longer ratios. Those are beneficial in an endurance situation because you can kind of force oil around to all the gears, and you have a little bit better lubrication system. Perceived.
So you are a fan of the oil pumps in the transmissions.
Yeah, in a street car, it doesn't matter though. Just straight up doesn't matter. It won't make a difference.
In a drag car, it's probably about the same too, but it's definitely in a road course situation. I don't know. Yeah, it's massive.
Dewey has mentioned it has benefited him. So
for sure, yeah, your third gear life would benefit. Just getting oil flowing through like synchronizers and flowing through the bearings and stuff. I have seen heat in needle bearings and transmissions, and that's my sort of like danger. You'll see heat in things. I have not seen stuff seize, but I've seen just like heat in parts after cleaning it off, and I'm like, okay, like I see that, and like when you build them, there's ways you're supposed to clock things to sort of control the oil flow through them, and not everybody does that. Some people will just kind of throw stuff together, and that's kind of there's certain things in the factory service manual that are very critical, or relatively critical. And there's things that I follow like it's a Bible, and then there's things that kind of don't matter as much that people think are like the most important thing ever.
Yeah, you get that everywhere. What about? I think we're running out of our list. We actually did crack through most or all of it. Let's see here. Helical sequentials. What do you think about helical sequentials?
What do you think about just sequentials in general? Let's talk about sequentials, or let's talk about dog boxes too. Just, a lot of people don't even understand what dog engagement is. Let's have a quick conversation about that. Then let's go dog box, then let's go sequential, and why you would or would not want to use those on the street for long periods of time, and why. All right, let's hear it.
We'll run around kind of the different levels to it, right? So you have your OEM WRX, it fails at like 300 torque, right? And then you go to an STI transmission, about 600 torque. It depends on turbo size. You start to get into like the limitation of the gear set itself. It's like 600 torque, and then people make 950, 1,000 torque, or have made that much torque on it, and that they'll handle it for a period of time. And then, so like, what would be like your next upgrade if you were like a smaller turbo, or you have a lot of torque and you're gonna kill a gear set over time. Usually like third or fourth will fail in an STI. The upgrade, the cool upgrade that IAG has come out with is the PPG straight cut synchronized transmission. So it shifts in the way that your factory STI 6-speed shifts. Everything is the same, imperceivable difference. Now, with the straight cut gears, there will be more noise in the vehicle and more noise through the shifter, as those gears don't have like a progressive mesh like a helical cut, so they're cut straight and not at an angle. So an angle cut gear, as it's rotating, you hit the corner of the gear, and then it like rolls across the face of the gear or of the tooth. Where the straight cut, it's kind of like a paddle. It's just
That'll
kind of
naturally kind of force it to separate, right?
It'll kind of it'll kind of force it. You have a larger contact window happening, so you get more noise out of it.
Yep.
And so, but that transmission, and pretty much, I mean, try to break it. I'd love to see someone try to break it. I don't think it can be broken. You'll probably snap the bolts off your flywheel before you break that IAG gear set synchro trans. Now that's like your streetcar guy. The ratios change a little bit because you're obviously higher horsepower at that point, so you go to a slightly taller ratio in first and fourth. So a stock STI transmission at the drag strip, you shift the car nearly at or just before the tree. They get out of first gear really fast, and the longer first gear kind of helps, and then it also helps with that tall drop to second gear. With a slightly taller first gear, you have less of an RPM drop into second. And just generally, it helps with 60-foot times because you're not making a shift in the 60-foot. That's a great gear set, and that's also paired nicely with the Legacy Spec B56. So you retain having a fifth gear. If you don't, it's a 5% drop into fifth from fourth to fifth with a PPG IAG gear set.
That's like
so that 5% drop is like nothing. You just have a loud and a quiet fourth gear, and then when you go up from there, there's kind of two ways to go about it, right? So in the US, dog boxes are much more prevalent because that is what is competitive, or what is in the rule package of events like FL2K, TX2K. A H pattern is an H pattern is an H pattern. So you are racing against other H pattern, even if it's locked out or has strain gauges and all that.
Just so you know, those are all drag racing sanctioning bodies, but you also run into a lot of the same shit with Time Attack these days.
Yeah. So if you have to shift the car like a man, that's looked at one way.
Beth is gonna kill you, by the way.
You say that, okay. There are some seriously fast women in drag racing Subarus.
Yes, there is.
I apologize. It's just the joke, the long-standing joke with that, right? So, but either way, you're shifting the car. You have that ability to shift the car into the wrong gear, and I know plenty of people that have. The guy I support, Josh Bader, he money shifted his dog box like 5 times, and it ended up in a 6-speed. If you money shift it, he didn't really do it at a ridiculously high RPM, like what you see the pro front wheel drive Hondas where they stoppy. In his situation, it threw him forward pretty good in the car, and generally in a 6-speed, the weak link is the front diff. People will mistakenly upgrade their front diff because they money shift it and scatter it. It's better that you scatter your front diff and cost yourself $2,000 to repair it than it is to scatter like the rods out of something, in my opinion. So yeah, you can money shift a dog box.
I wish my front diff would have went when I money shifted my shit. Mm-hmm. Hey, what happened?
Yeah,
the car burned down due to it.
Yeah,
same thing. Safety.
It's the worst of times.
Yep.
Yeah, and so if you don't have a good lockout shifter in place, it's going to be a front diff situation. I know some people it's just they're ready for it. So that's what kind of happens there. So when you look at it, like you have your H pattern racing, and that's very popular in the US. You get a lot of dog box people. A lot of people that's what they have in their car. IAG has multiple versions of that, and I can see there's the T56 input, and then there's the standard input. For people that are over the 1,000 torque number and need the capacity of the larger clutch, the input shaft technically at some point is a weak point. In the same way that you upgrade your transfer gear to an IAG transfer gear, it upsizes the splines on the output shaft. The input shaft, if you didn't know, in an STI is the same spline as the output shaft. So your input, if you have like a drive shaft, you can literally put a drive shaft on the input shaft of an STI. It splines right on. So, but again, the spline and the size of the shaft is a weak point at some point. And for the people over 1,000 torque, or make it over, let's say, 1,200 horsepower, you run into a clutch limitation. And there's not too many people that have that problem, but they have the better option of the T56 spline, and that's considered an upgrade at that level. Not everybody needs it, and that IAG Exetti clutch is rated at 1,400 foot-pounds from the engineer I spoke to at Exetti, who builds those. And then I also talked to ACT, They can build a similar clutch. It'd be a mod series type of clutch, and they would change the pressure plate and discs accordingly, and they can make a clutch that's T56 spline. As it's a mod series, that's modular. You can change out the hubs with a different splined hub, so they also can make you a really high horsepower, high capacity clutch. And then beyond that, so if you have a car that is pure enjoyment, the sequential is an option.
Well, it depends. If you're a full track slot too.
Right.
Yeah.
Everybody has seen the videos online. Yeah, everybody's seen the videos online on like 1320 video, where you get that like Subaru with the sequential, or you get that like Evo, like their famous, that racing channel has that sequential Evo. I think everybody has seen that video of that car rowing gears, hanging with like all kinds of stuff it should have never hung with at the horsepower level that it was at. And if you have the car and it's pure enjoyment, like you just build it to have fun on back roads, or if your class allows it in a circuit application, that's where you want to be. Like a sequential, nothing can beat it. For $20,000, nothing is more enjoyable, I wouldn't say, than that. And you see a lot of them overseas in the UK and in Japan and in Australia, because a lot of their racing bodies, as long as it has a clutch, it's still a manual, or looked at as if it was a manual. So that's where sequentials are a big deal, and you see a lot of them. It's a very cool transmission, and getting to drive one, you'll be just like blown away. You're just like, oh my god, I've never felt something so mechanical and engaging in my life. Like, same thing with those mechanical or the sequential side by sides. It's the same feeling of connection with your vehicle. It's the enjoyment. And if it works for you and your sanctioning body, that's amazing. And if it's within your budget, a sequential is so cool. And I would recommend it, but there's not a lot of them over here, and I've never built one. I get inquiries, and I'm basically like, it's 18 to 20,000, and
you never hear back.
It is what it is, and it's like, okay, got it. And actually, I kind of point people towards ZF Design. He builds a lot of them. He builds a lot of the X Shift sequentials. He is well known for building those, and he is the guy that is the expert on those. So a plug to him.
That may be something that's happening in the not too distant future to a certain street modified car, just due to the fact how
the rules are written
poorly. The rules are written poorly, and we're going to exploit them.
Yeah, how do you look at the rule package? Are you the person that looks at the rules for what they are, or do you look at the rules for like, look what I can get away with?
No. There's different ways to read a rule book. Now, with an SCCA rule book or something like that, they explicitly have a rule that states if it's not in the rules, it's not allowed. Okay? Mm. Now, with a time attack rule set, you read the rule book backwards. You go through and you read the rule book 2 or 3 times, you see what it says. Okay? Yep. You're like, okay, this is what it says. Then you read it 300 more times to see what it doesn't say, and you do all of that.
Yep, I've seen that, and that's how you get those like bazillion-dollar cars that you see that are sponsored by a whole bunch of people, and you're just like, holy smoke!
BMW DCT transmissions and Subaru STIs with stock transmission cases,
or 95 Impreza L's with daily dry sump systems.
Right.
And, you
do that to get ice cream. You need that,
and the fan mod.
I 100% need that to get ice cream.
Yeah, and the fan mod, as we were discussing last week, the air suction device or whatever.
Yeah. You're stoked about that, aren't you?
I thought it was hilarious. That's so awesome.
You think I'm lying? I'm not.
No, I know you're dead serious.
I am serious as a heart attack. If somebody, I need a couple of people who want to go through with that, and we will make it happen. I have this all drawn out.
I want to see it. We want to see it.
Well,
we want to see it, Dewey.
Build a diff with a spline thing coming out the top. That's step number 1.
You basically just need 2 pinions. Like a pinion going in and then a pinion going out the top.
Yeah, you need a 4-wheel drive transfer case to power like a PTO, basically, to a fan, hydrostatic fan.
I think you could just literally build it with the differential, and you know how, again, you got the pinion coming in, and then that same ring would power it going out.
Oh my god, like 2 transfer, like have the drop gear have an output. Like the drop gear
I
in a
mean, just
Subaru
you would do
transmission
it
come
with
out
your
the back.
you do it with your rear diff. You just
Yep.
build the diff
Oh,
housing to have two pinions. One would be in, and then the other one is going to get powered by the ring itself.
oh, gotcha. Yeah. That's hilarious. Yeah, that would be really cool. The other, one other thing I like to touch on because it's in the transmission, and I've had a recent experience with it in a positive way. Was DCCD. In my opinion, those have a lifespan. In your later style 07 and onward, they have like a carbon style clutch in there. And when I rebuild them, I go through them to clean them, but I also like check them to make sure they're in good health. And it seems like anyone over like 600 to 700 horsepower who's gone through a motor or two, that's kind of my mileage abuse number is a couple motors.
You're just gonna call me out. Just call me out, okay?
Yeah, so a couple motors at some point, right? Like that should be taken apart and just looked at. It's a very simple process. I have a YouTube video showing exactly how they assemble, so that if you took it apart, if you took it apart and were like, oh shit, I don't know how this goes back together. I have a good video showing that start to finish. It's like 12 minutes long on early style and late style, just for your assembly. It helps in a drag application, as that's primarily what I am used to, or what I have been dealing with like Josh. The DCCD is a very helpful tool in traction, as it varies the torque front. It allows torque to be transferred front to back in a situation where the chassis doesn't want that, where you load the back suspension up really hard and your front tires kind of want to come off the ground or slip. The DCCD is there to sort of reach out and grab that and keep those front tires rotating. And a lot of all-wheel drive drag racing, you're like, why is this car a shit show off the line? It's a lot of times the DCCD, they don't have a handle on it. They don't know what it's doing. And to be honest, with me and Josh's program, we didn't really have a handle on it for a while. And as soon as we got DCCD in the car and we started making some adjustments, the car did the best 60-foot it's ever done. And that was purely because it was able to manage the slip. And as the car chassis loaded up and the front tires slip, they do like 1 revolution or 2 revolutions, not John Force burnout to the 60-foot and then it hooks in second gear like it's been doing for the past
you get a lot
3
of
years.
They'll go out there thinking that, because they don't understand how DCCD works, they'll go out there and try to run the car without any sort of controller because they think it's more rear-wheel drive. Like not having any clue to how DCCD functions.
It is
you get that all the time. And so if you get it right with just the right amount of slip, it's about as good as you can get. It's going to be phenomenal.
Yeah, people don't understand that operation and the way that it is controlled from Subaru. Simply, when Subaru on the spec sheet says it's a 60-40 torque split, if you lift the car up off the ground, it's not that the front tires are spinning 40% the speed that the rear tires are spinning. It's more so the way that the planetary reduction is set up in that differential. You essentially, the outside of the DCCD is the sun gear, and you have the planetary carrier that is going to the back, and that is what the clutches themselves physically clamp, is the rear. And then as that clutch clamps, it also halts the sun gear from rotating. So the front is the center gear, the sun gear is what powers the front wheels, and the nominal, based on the ratios of that planetary assembly, the torque split is 60-40. Perceived torque split, like if you were to break an axle, or if something happened where something broke or didn't work in the drivetrain, it is an open diff. It is still just an open planetary diff, and without any form of electronic control, it can lock up. It has the viscosity of the oil affects the way the electronic plates in the front move around. So with no control, there is some amount of limited slip action that does occur naturally, as the mechanical ball ramp will still apply, but there is no way to, let's say, lock it. It's enough to maybe do flat spins in snow, but not enough to, like, rely on it in a car. It'll spin tires on a track.
What you're talking about is the 06 and up diff too. Like, have you?
Yeah.
Like the older ones don't have that.
They
Like,
do. It's all the same.
Okay.
It's
So
it's
the
the
older
same
ones,
principles. That,
when you go open though, I mean, like you can 100% feel the difference between open in an '06 and newer
yeah.
versus an open in an '05 and earlier. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like it's
Yeah.
open.
Physically, the dimension, or physically those planetary ratios are different,
Yeah.
and the ratios are different. So you have more mechanical advantage being sent to the rear tires. So that's why those will feel like, I've heard of people like actually doing a rear wheel drive burnout with
Yes.
those ones, and they use a like a 6-disc steel clutch pack that is a little bit more, I would maybe say, robust than the later '07 and onward. But there is certain other limitations with that. Just it's beyond the scope of what I can really answer. But they both operate in a similar manner. They both use an electronic magnet to excite these metallic plates in the front. Those metallic plates basically lock, or they are resistant to movement when there's a magnetic field applied to them. That there's a hub inside of there that has a cam system. So there's basically like a little ramp inside of there with check balls. As you lock that clutch up, the mechanical ramp, then those balls want to move at different rates as the vehicle slips. And then when that happens, that little mechanical ramp in there basically applies the clutch. So when people are like, they're locked 50-50 with the torque split, when you, let's say, lock a DCCD, looking at it as a 50-50 torque split is maybe a little bit inaccurate. I would call it more of like a 100-100, where in reality, like 100% of the engine torque can go front to back, whether or not all four tires are on the ground. It's still sending 100%, 100%. So that's my level and the way that I look at it. And you can really hurt a lot of stuff by trying to lock it if you don't know. I've personally seen people with like a rotated 35R. I know a personal friend of mine, he decided out he was going to lock his DCCD on the starting line in like a rotated car. And the way it was tuned, it made all the boost on the two-step, and he launched it. It sheared all the teeth off the factory transfer gear, and it did like a bit of a front wheel drive burnout. And because it was locked, he grabbed second because he thought it was just spinning. So then when he grabbed second, it spun the DCCD and welded it so quickly that it broke both front axles, and he didn't even make it past the tree. So he cost himself about $4,500 before he made it to the tree, or the 60-foot cone on the racetrack. So just to tell you how bad it can get, if you don't know, now you know. Look at it as it is a torque transfer device, and make swings, but start at 70%. Don't go full 90%, 100% on the lock, as it is. I'll
go back to our discussion from a while back. If you don't know, leave it in auto.
Yep. It doesn't have a capacity limitation, really. I suppose if you had no traction up front, you could slip it under an extreme circumstance. But pretty much whatever engine torque is going through the DCCD, and the DCCD is going to make it happen. And I would say beyond maybe 70%, it may as well kind of be locked. But at least there's kind of a little bit of give in there that can happen. So that's just kind of from what I've seen. That's kind of something I wanted to touch on, because we made big gains with with messing with it, going from 30% to 70%. It went from doing front wheel drive Honda burnouts to hooking all four tires and doing like a personal best 60-foot. So it's just something to look at. I see some people that don't really have a handle on it sometimes, and it could help their program out if they address it. So I don't know.
Well,
that was a lot. Knowledge bomb.
That was a lot.
Yeah.
That was a lot of trans talk.
Hey, yo. Yeah, we'll have to.
At a certain point, we could always do another one of these, but we have got to. We're at almost 2 hours now, so.
I knew it was going to be a long one. There's a lot of knowledge bombs dropped in there, and there's a lot of good info, and it's something that you might have to listen to twice or 3 times to kind of fully understand it.
And if you guys have any questions, how would they? You can always hit me up, but how would they get a hold of you? Where
Yeah,
you're-
so
how
I'm
if
online.
somebody's like, I need something rebuilt, something like that. How do they get a hold of you?
I would go on Instagram and look up Jonny, Jonny _. It's probably going to pop up just with that, but it's Jonny _trans, TRANS. There's a weird apostrophe on the A because trans was not allowed in the name on Facebook, as Facebook is what it is, but Instagram allowed it with the username, so that was fine. But yeah, I wouldn't Google Jonny Trans. That might not be ideal. But I will pop up if you Google me. It's just sort of a joke. There's some, you'd have to Google it. You'd understand why I say not to Google it. Anyway, at your own risk. It's not nothing bad. So, anyway, I get it. I get the jokes. It's kind of funny. Just, I get them and it's no big deal. It's the haha, nice, funny jokes. And it is what it is. But yeah, that's how you can find me online. I have some small YouTube videos tearing down some transmissions. I have a 6-speed or a 5+1 transmission tear down on there where it had a broken fork. And then I have a couple DCCD help videos and then, just some small stuff. But feel free to reach out on Instagram.
Please make a video where you have a 5+1 speed next to a proper STI 6-speed.
Yes.
And it show the differences because these people need to see it.
Yeah, I could do it.
I made a video a long time ago during a live cast, and that live cast got shared like crazy, where it was me showing the difference between the 5-speed and the 6-speed. But like now it's so much more confusing where there being 2 6-speed transmissions. So if I were you, I'd break it down, like show the difference between the main shafts and the different sizes and the gear sizing and how different they are, the way the case goes together. Like really show it close.
I could show it comparison to a 5-speed too. Yeah, I could show it in comparison to a 5-speed, and I can show the similarities. Yeah, there's like one local for this is probably like $500. I'll probably go pick that up. I could make that video and do that. But yeah, anyway, that's a long-winded transmission stuff. It's not something that a lot of people are affected by. Some people just have a problem and they need me to fix it, and then that's the only thing that they've ever dealt with it. But there is some cool stuff you can do while things are apart.
There's an amount of performance to be unlocked by approaching your transmission correctly. So
yeah, absolutely. Like shockproof fluid, big gains.
This guy
cuts the longevity down by a 10.
No, we're ending this shit. I'm kicking his ass out of here. All right.
Gotcha.
It's been real. It's been fun. It's been real fun. We will see you guys next week.